Welcome to the Explainer. The history we learn in school, it's often just the surface level, right? Today, we're going to dig a lot deeper. We're uncovering some truly disturbing stories that have been hidden away in the footnotes. Stories that show a much, much darker side to events we thought we knew. All right, so here's what we've got lined up. We're going to journey through three completely distinct forms of historical horror. We'll start with a single person's tragic fate, then move on to a bizarre, macabre mystery, and we'll finish up by exploring the chilling depths of calculated, systematic evil. So, for our first story, we're heading to a moment in American history that, well, everyone knows. But we're not focusing on the main event. Instead, we're looking at a man who was right there in the thick of it, but whose fate has been almost totally forgotten. Ford's Theater, April 14th, 1865. You know the story, right? President Abraham Lincoln is there to see a play, and John Wilkes Booth assassinates him. It's a moment that completely changed the course of the nation. But think about it. Who else was actually in that presidential box with them? It wasn't just Lincoln and his wife, Mary. There was another couple there with them, a decorated Union Army officer named Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris. Okay, so picture this. The shot rings out, and Rathbone, without even thinking, he just lunges at Booth. But in that chaotic struggle, Booth pulls out a dagger and slashes Rathbone's arm wide open, from his elbow all the way to his shoulder, before he leaps off the balcony. It was an incredibly brave thing to do, but that one moment, that one violent act, would come back to haunt him for the rest of his life. And that's where things really start to go wrong. He was this decorated military major, right? And in his own mind, he failed. He felt he should have been able to stop it. That single thought just festered. It completely ate away at him, slowly but surely driving him into madness. So you see, the horror of what happened in that theater didn't end when Lincoln died, not by a long shot. For Henry Rathbone, that was just the beginning of his own personal nightmare, a dark epilogue that ended in another brutal murder and decades locked away in an asylum. Okay, let's shift gears now. We're leaving America and heading to 19th century Paris for a story that's, well, it's a really macabre mystery, but with a legacy that is shockingly modern. So sometime in the late 1880s, a young woman's body is pulled from the River Seine in Paris. Nobody knew who she was, no papers, no witnesses. She became known simply as l'inconnue de la Seine, the unknown woman of the Seine. The thing that just stunned everyone was her face. She drowned, but her expression, it was so peaceful, almost like she was smiling. Back then, it was common practice to put unidentified bodies on display at the morgue, hoping someone would recognize them. And a pathologist working there was so completely captivated by her serene look that he had a plaster death mask made to capture it forever. And this is where it gets weird. People in Paris became obsessed with this mask. Her face became the symbol of tragic beauty. Copies were made and sold, and soon her face was hanging on the walls of homes all over the city, like some kind of morbid art piece. She inspired poems, stories, all about this mysterious, anonymous girl who seemed to welcome death so calmly. But her story doesn't just end there as a piece of weird 19th century art. No, her legacy took a really bizarre turn in the 20th century. And honestly, it's why her face might look just a little bit familiar to you. In fact, I'd bet you've not only seen it, you might have even put your lips on it. Get this, her face is the face of Rescue Annie. The CPR training mannequin that's been used all over the world since the 1960s? That's right, the face that millions upon millions of people have practiced mouth-to-mouth on belongs to an unidentified teenage girl who drowned in the Seine more than a century ago. It's an absolutely haunting and bizarre legacy, isn't it? All right, for our final story, we're escalating things. We've seen personal tragedy, we've seen a macabre mystery. Now we're going to look at the horror of systematic, institutionalized evil during World War II. Over 250,000. That's the minimum estimated number of victims of Unit 731. This was a secret research facility run by the Imperial Japanese Army in occupied China during the war. And what happened there? It's truly one of the darkest chapters in modern history. Now, officially, this place was just a lumber mill. And to keep up that grotesque cover story, the human victims, who were mostly Chinese and Russian prisoners of war, were not even referred to as people. They were called maruta, which is the Japanese word for logs. And the experiments they conducted, It's just a horrifying list of human cruelty. Vivisections on conscious people, amputating limbs just to study blood loss, testing weapons on living targets. And according to testimony from people who worked there, a lot of this wasn't even for a specific scientific goal. It was just to satisfy what they called a morbid professional curiosity. They described what they were doing as play.
So what happened to the people who did this? Well, after the war, you'd expect them to face justice for war crimes, right? No. Instead, the leaders of Unit 731 were secretly given immunity by the United States. And why? In exchange for all their data. The research they got from these gruesome experiments was considered too valuable to let fall into Soviet hands.
So when you put these stories together, you can really see how horror can show up on completely different scales. You've got the personal, the mysterious, and the chillingly bureaucratic. Yeah, from the shattered mind of one man, Henry Rathbone, to the strange second life of the unknown woman of the Seine, all the way up to the cold, calculated cruelty of an entire institution like Unit 731. What these stories really show us is that sometimes the darkest parts of our history are hiding right there in plain sight. You know, these aren't ghost stories or myths. These are real, documented events. They're a powerful reminder of the disturbing truths that are just lying under the surface of the history we think we know. It really shows you what people are capable of for good and way too often for evil. So, what's the takeaway here? It's that history is never, ever as simple as it seems. And it's often in the shadows, in the forgotten footnotes, that we find the most unsettling and maybe the most important lessons. What else is lurking in the history we think we know? Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.
Okay, let's dive into some of history's darkest corners, stories that are often way stranger than fiction.
We're going to explore cruelty on a few different scales: institutional, individual, and, well, even intellectual.
First, let's look at state-sanctioned evil, where individuals just become cogs in a terrifying machine.
7,000. That's how many people one Soviet executioner, Vasily Blokhin, personally killed in only 28 days.
He developed this brutally efficient system, working 10-hour shifts during the Cotton Massacre. Just unbelievable.
Now, let's talk about Japan's Unit 731. This was a secret center for absolutely lethal human experiments.
The prisoners, who they called logs, went through unimaginable horrors, often just for the sake of curiosity. Okay, let's shift gears. What about cruelty that comes from just one person's mind?
Take Major Henry Rathbone. His life just spiraled from hero at Lincoln's side to murderer, haunted by one night.
But then you have someone like H.H. Holmes, whose mind was just wired for pure, calculated evil. Yeah, the Murder Castle legend is wild, but you know what? The real, confirmed facts are just as monstrous.
So what happens when the search for knowledge goes horribly wrong and becomes an excuse for atrocity?
Well, in the name of research, U.S. doctors actually infected Guatemalan citizens with STDs on purpose.
Then there was the CIA's Project MK-Ultra. Its goal? To control the human mind, using any means necessary. And get this, they tested these methods on prisoners, patients, and even just regular, unsuspecting people. So these stories, they're not just grim trivia. They show a dark potential in our systems and in ourselves. It really shines a light on the danger of just doing nothing when you see something terrible happen.
So the real question is, if history is trying to warn us, are any of us actually listening?